This segment is necessarily somewhat of an exercise in futility, as the variables in assessing fine lenses for close work are many, and their permutations seemingly endless, infinite. Still, we can't own them all, at least I can't, and in the end, we must make some attempt to compare lenses one to another in order to decide what lens might be most useful to us for a particular kind of work. Now, there are several types of information presented here, including the various specifications for each lens, a photo of the lens, and some brief comments on my part about my use of that lens, if I've used it very much. But I encourage you to check out the internet very carefully. You can look for lens reviews easily, and you can even look on Amazon, of course, to get some general idea. The internet forums are filled with lens advice, and you can pretty much find anything you want to prove about a lens or against a lens claimed somewhere, either for or against a given lens. Now, finding good advice that's also true is a little more difficult. Now, I'm going to list here the three main sources that I trust for true advice about lenses, and I list them in the order that I discovered them, which has also turned out to be the order of their importance to me so far. Now, the first, and to me the greatest lensman, is Björn Röslet. Now, this is the gentleman whose site taught me about macro lenses to begin with, and I salute him. He has a wonderful area of lens reviews for Nikon format lenses at this URL, nikongear.com. He refers to himself as the fierce bear of the north, which is also true. He certainly growls a lot and has been on occasion known to bite. But when it comes to the mechanics of lenses, and a lot more than that too, this is the man to read carefully. Some of my best lenses were introduced to me through his postings. Another person that I trust with lenses is Tom Hogan. Hogan's another living treasure for lens lovers, and he appears to be more in my style, being also a software engineer, hardware engineer, and a general techie, as am I. His website is worth checking out on a daily basis, and I'm going to list the URL for you here. Hogan not only has spot-on lens reviews, but his website is the best way to keep up on what's happening with all of the larger camera manufacturers. And articles and lens reviews of all kinds are also available, like how to clean your sensor and so forth. Just check out the Hogan site. Another person that I've learned some from is Lloyd Chambers. Lloyd Chambers offers kind of a smorgasbord of treats for DSLR users and lens fanatics like me. A lot of it's free, or some of it's free, but most of it's by subscription. You can find his site listed here. By all means, read the free stuff. I also subscribe to Chambers' it's called DAP, Advanced Photography, and then he has a whole special subscription thing called Making Sharp Images. I'm only sorry that I waited so long to subscribe out of sheer miserliness. I didn't want to spend the money. But Making Sharp Images is perhaps the best concise tutorial on all facets of photography that I've ever read. It's worth every penny. None of the books that I own give me this kind of information in a convenient-to-read format. And again, let me talk about, I mentioned it earlier, nikongear.com. I've given you my favorite 3 photography sites above, so those sites I check out as often as I have time. I'm also registered at a number of other photography forums, but I only really hang out at one, and that's nikongear.com. In my opinion, the world's best lens experts can be found there, and it's there that I go for up-to-the-minute reviews and tests of the latest lenses. This forum is not really for novices, and even somewhat experienced photographers like myself get bitten by the experts when we say something really dumb. But a nip every now and then is worth it to be in the company of technical experts of this caliber. I highly recommend NikonGear.com, and I am a lifetime subscriber. In this segment, the specifications and lens photos, I'm sure you're going to find useful because they're seldom gathered in one place altogether. And this should save you from searching for this kind of information everywhere. In what follows, I also include a quick shot of a photo of the lens itself and any comments that I have about the lens. By all means, take my comments with a grain of salt. They are my impression from using that particular lens, and since in day-to-day use I actually have my favorites, many of these lenses get only occasional use. Still, some of my observations may be helpful. At least that's my hope. Well, before we begin lens by lens, I'll say just a few words about what, in my opinion, makes a good lens for close-up and macro work, and also especially for focus stacking. So this is a little bit about how to pick a lens. There are a number of key factors that figure into what makes a good close-up or macro lens. Not all lenses have all of the desired factors, and some of it depends on the particular kind of photography that you want to do. No lens, or actually very few anyway, seem to have everything, which is amazing to me, how few all-around lenses there are in the area of near and macro photography. For example, some lenses will have better sharpness, some better color, and so on. As you read about the factors and the qualities of lenses, you will want to keep your eye on the qualities that are most important to your work. My first attempts at macro photography were somewhere around 1956, when armed with the Kodak Retina 2A and a close-up lens, I began to take some macro shots. They were not too successful, but then I was only 15 years old. In recent years, I spent a lot of time doing close-up and macro nature photography. In my search for the right lenses, I've tried a good number of them. So here's what I value most in a lens for near focus. Sharpness has got to be high on the list for any of us who do near photography. Of course I want it sharp, but the more I work with lenses, the less I'm concerned about what we could call absolute sharpness. Almost all of the lenses I'll discuss here are sharp enough. And there are a lot of very fine sharp lenses available in the Nikon mount, or that can be fairly easily converted to that mount. And sharpness is not the only consideration. A lens can be very sharp but difficult to use for other reasons, like it may be too sensitive to light, or the widest aperture does not give you enough light in the viewfinder, and so forth, or the focus throw is too short for macro work. Now, I value a fast lens. Now, to me, that's one with small f-stop numbers like 1.4 and f2.8 and so forth. And not only because I like to shoot wide open to stack, but because I need to have maximum light in my viewfinder for focusing well. Since I often am photographing around dawn or when the light is still fairly dim but nice, I need to see what I'm doing. And the bright light of full sun is not what I'm looking for. I seldom ever photograph then except with a bunch of diffusers, so to diffuse the light. Also, I do a lot of focus stacking, and I need to see what to focus on at each step. I don't entirely agree with those who say that to focus stack, you need just to get in front of the subject and then automatically click on through, and not focus on anything in particular, but just sure you have regular intervals, steps. Of course, I understand what they're pointing at here, but in my experience, this is not enough. For example, round spherical objects in the frame do not stack well. your increments have to be much finer, shorter than otherwise if your subject is round. In fact, in many subjects, there are key points that you'll get to as you move from front to back of the subject that you don't want to just automatically increment past, but instead to very carefully be sure to get them in extreme focus. Use smaller increments. In other words, if I am blindly incrementing along with the stack and I reach a key point, I do even finer increments before, at, and after that point to make sure that that area is in prime focus. There often are several such points in the series, and I need to be able to see to focus in the viewfinder to do that. So I want a fast lens, if only for visibility. For example, someone commented on a forum recently about the Nikon 70 to 180 millimeter zoom macro. I know this lens. I spent a couple of years intensely using that lens, but gradually abandoned it because its widest aperture is 4.5. This morning I got that lens out just in case I had made a misjudgment or I might see it differently today. It was about 8:30 a.m. here, and the sun had not really gotten strong. Looking through the 70 to 180 millimeter, it was very dim indeed, and not at all bright enough for my work as I like it. Now, on a bright day, that lens would be fine. But again, I don't shoot in bright sunlight. And I tend to avoid even bare sunlight, concentrating almost always on light haze or even into the shadows. So the 70 to 180 zoom Nikon macro lens is a wonderful lens. It really is. But it's not for me for the reasons mentioned above. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about when we get to lens by lens evaluation. And let's say something about focus throw. This is not often mentioned, the focus throw of a lens. How many degrees does the helicoid, the focusing barrel on the lens, have to rotate to go from close-up to infinity? I was surprised at some of the very finest macro lenses that have such a short focus throw. For macro work, and especially for focus stacking, I need a longish focus throw, or else I should put the camera on a focusing rail where I can control that. Now, I prefer the long focus throw to carrying a focusing rail around with me all the time, although I'm using the rail more and more of the time. Now, I was shocked to find that the very, very expensive Coastal Optics 60mm APO macro f4 lens has a focus throw of only 210 degrees. For example, the Cosina Voigtlander 125mm macro lens, APO lens, has a focus throw of 630 degrees. And the Leica 100mm Elmarit R has a focus throw of 710 degrees. That means very fine increments by turning the barrel. However, the old standard micro Nikkor 60mm f2.8, either D or G macro, has a focus throw of only 120 degrees. And that's just not desirable, especially since it's a little bit of a wider angled lens. So good macro lenses with a short focus throw really have to be put on a focusing rail if you're going to get serious about it. In other words, the wider the angle macro lens, 50mm, 60mm, 40mm, whatever it is, the more important it is to have a long focus throw. Macro work is just the opposites of sports photography, where you want a short focus throw. In macro, and most of all in focus stacking, a long focus throw is a huge advantage. You need a long focus throw, or else you need to be using a focusing rail. So if you really love a good sharp lens that has a short focus throw, put it on a rail. You get used to rails pretty fast. Another factor in lenses is what's called the reproduction ratio. How large is the image in the frame? Most macro photographers prefer a lens that goes to 1:1. Now, 1:1 means that the image in the sensor that hits the sensor and the subject image are the same size. It's amazing that not very many good macro lenses get to 1:1. In fact, there are whole businesses that help you get from the smaller ratios like 1:2 up to 1:1 image size. So there are not all that many lenses that will give you 1:1 ratio. In my view of putting close-up diopters or adapters on the front of my lenses or adding extension tubes on the rear is not flattering. I have all the key diopters, tubes, teleconverters, and so on, but I use them only as a very last resort. And the truth is I hardly ever use them at all. I know that many photographers love them, but it's my opinion that a lens, just as it is sold, is a perfectly balanced thing, and anything added to it can only lead to a degraded image. And this is a fact, and I want to avoid that degradation. Lucky for a lot of the work that I do, I don't always need to have a 1:1 reproduction ratio, because really I'm a close-up photographer. I shoot a lot of close-up work, what I call mini landscapes or dioramas, so I can use lenses that are not ultra close, not macro lenses. Now here's a really important point for me. Not everyone agrees on this, so take this with a grain of salt, but consider it carefully. What I'm talking about are what are called apochromatic lenses. These are not absolutely required, except by me, but very helpful. Apochromatic or APO lenses are lenses that are corrected for chromatic and spherical aberration more than the common what are called achromat lenses. Now there are not many very good ones. The most well-known good ones in the Nikon format being the Cosina Voigtlander 125 APO Lanther. Another is the Leica 100mm APO Elmarit R that has to be converted mount-wise to fit on a Nikon, and the Coastal Optics 60mm APO lens. The truth is I prefer APO lenses in all of my work most of the time. In my opinion, the difference in coloring can be dramatic, so I can't say enough about using corrected lenses. In fact, I've written many articles about my quest for sharpness finally turned into removing the color fringing and the various other kinds of aberrations that occur in lenses, which is what apochromatic is all about, getting those last little bits of fringing and distortion out of the lenses. I should also mention minimum focus distance. Most lenses that are used for macro work have a very short minimum focus distance. In fact, many can appear too short if you're working with live animals, live critters, like 50 and 60mm macro lenses. If you're shooting insects or live whatever, some lenses require you to be so close to the subject that the end of the lens actually blocks the light, or the close proximity of the lens scares off whatever you're photographing. The 60mm range of macro lenses are in this category, and while the 100mm to 105mm macro lenses are the most popular, many photographers would rather work with lenses in the 200mm range because it gives them just enough extra distance from their subjects to not disturb them. So if you're really into photographing critters, then a lens in the 200mm range may be what you're looking for. One odd technique that I sometimes use is to use a telephoto lens like the Nikon 300mm f4 EDIF lens, which has a minimum focus distance of something like 4.9 feet. But I use it on a large megapixel sensor like the Nikon D3X or the Nikon D800E, and then I crop out a photo. For example, I can photograph a frog in the middle of the pond, crop it out, and still have enough pixels for a fine photo. So in summary, Those are some of my main considerations when choosing a macro lens. I don't care how heavy or bulky a lens is. Carting these things around is, by now, second nature to me. It's easy to see that if we insist on having all of the above points in a single lens, we are quickly down to like almost no lenses. In fact, the one lens that I have that is sharp, fast, has a long focus throw, goes to 1:1, and has real true APO is the Voigtlander 125mm f2.5 APO Lanther. However, it costs like $3,000 now on eBay. No other lens has all of these features without adding diopters or settling for a shorter focus throw or whatever it is. So it's no wonder that this lens is in great demand and also expensive. But the Nikon 105, the newer one, VR macro, is also pretty darn good and has almost all of these same features. So I hope that's been helpful. Now let's look at, in another segment, lenses one by one.